He had locked the door, turned off every light, and told himself he was safe. Then he heard the whisper of someone breathing behind him, in a room he was absolutely alone in. What happened next was captured nowhere. Until now. Stay, and you'll see it exactly as it unfolded. The town had always seemed ordinary. Streets lined with houses, the familiar glow of streetlights casting shadows that stretched too long, too thin, into the night. But for one family, ordinary was a fragile illusion. It began subtly, almost invisibly. A door left ajar that had never been opened. A window latch shifted without explanation. The faint smell of smoke lingering in rooms that hadn't been touched. Neighbors whispered. But whispers, as often happens, were dismissed as imagination, as coincidence. The family would tell their story with trembling voices, each retelling revealing details that had been buried behind closed doors. Details that made friends and strangers alike pause and reconsider the safety they felt inside their own homes. At first it was easy to rationalize. A creaking floorboard, an animal outside, a gust of wind. But then the messages began. Simple at first, chalk on the driveway, a note slipped under the door, each one seemingly harmless, but each one carefully crafted to leave a single thought echoing in the mind. Someone had been watching. Investigators would later describe the scenes as meticulous, almost methodical. The evidence was subtle, enough to unsettle, but not enough to point directly to a person. The family's cameras captured fleeting shadows, sometimes only for a frame or two. Audio recordings picked up sounds that did not belong. A whisper, a soft shuffle, a breath that did not match anyone in the house. And then came the disappearances. Small, almost negligible at first. A set of keys left behind in a bathroom. A child's favorite toy found in the garden. Each incident alone could be explained. Together, they formed a pattern no one could ignore. Outside, the town carried on. Children played. Neighbors argued over trivial matters. The sun rose and fell in predictable fashion. But inside that house, time moved differently. Every second stretched. Every shadow lingered longer than it should. Every sound demanded attention. The walls seemed to have memories, and the family began to feel that they were not the only occupants. Friends who tried to help were met with an inexplicable chill. They would later describe an unease so profound, it felt as though the house itself was breathing, observing. Every attempt to uncover the truth was met with obstruction. Doors locked themselves, lights flickered, cameras failed. And yet, the story had to be told. Through months of investigation, every lead seemed to circle back to the same realization. What was happening was intentional. Someone, or something, knew their routines, their fears, their smallest comforts. It watched not to threaten, but to anticipate. The deeper the family tried to probe, the more layers of strange, inexplicable events unfolded, each one challenging the boundary between the visible and the hidden. As the nights grew longer, the family's lives became a sequence of careful movements. Meals prepared in silence, bedrooms secured in patterns only they could remember, every sound analyzed and catalogued. Sleep became a distant memory. Trust, even between themselves, began to erode. And still, outsiders struggled to comprehend. Cameras, microphones, forensic analysis, everything offered fragments, but fragments alone cannot explain an entire story. The full truth lay in the lived experience, in moments too subtle for any recording device. The pattern was there, but invisible to the untrained eye. Tonight, as we retrace their steps, examine the fragments, and listen to their recounting, you will witness events that defy easy explanation. Events that make the ordinary seem fragile, that make safety feel like a fleeting concept, and that leave a single uncomfortable question hanging in the air. What would you do if you realized that the walls around you were not just walls? That someone, or something, was always present, just beyond sight, waiting for the exact moment to be seen. And so, the story continues, piece by piece, shadow by shadow, until the full picture emerges. A picture that is more terrifying because it does not fit into any story we think we know. It is real. It happened. And as the family will tell you, some truths are only understood when you experience them yourself. The rain fell in sheets, relentless, hammering against the roof and windows, drumming a rhythm that would have lulled most to sleep. But not tonight. Tonight, the house seemed alive in ways that had nothing to do with the storm. Inside, footsteps echoed faintly across the wooden floors. Not the creaks of an old house, but soft, deliberate steps. Pause. Another step. And then silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, that makes the air feel thicker, almost heavy. The family's eldest described it later. I could hear it, breathing, slow, deep, not mine, not anyone's I recognized. It came in cycles, always when the thunder roared, always when the wind rattled the windows. Some nights it was faint, barely audible over the storm. Other nights it grew closer, as if moving along the walls, shifting across the floor, inching nearer to the bedroom where they slept, or tried to. Doors moved slightly, not wide open, just ajar, almost imperceptibly, then back to where they had been. A latch clicked. Drawers slid just enough to leave the impression of something unseen, something meticulous, watching, testing. The family's youngest couldn't sleep at all. Under the cover of night, eyes wide, they swore they could hear a dragging sound, a soft scrape that seemed to circle the bed, beginning near the closet, creeping along the wall, stopping just short of the doorway. Every time they sat up, staring into the darkness, the sound would halt. And then, just as the storm howled outside, it would resume. A slow, deliberate pattern that no human could maintain for hours on end. By the second night, exhaustion began to blur their perception of time. Moments of quiet were filled with tension, so dense it felt like holding your breath underwater. The simplest tasks, pouring a glass of water, checking a door, lighting a candle, required courage. The house itself seemed to demand attention, every corner a potential threat, every shadow a moving shape, even if only imagined. Neighbors claimed they heard nothing. The rain was the only noise outside. Yet inside, the house whispered. Small, almost polite intrusions that left no trace, yet left the residents unsettled. A family photo tilted on the wall. A chair moved slightly closer to the bedroom door. Pages of books splayed as if someone had read them, line by line, then left them untouched for hours. And then came the first real message, subtle but impossible to ignore. Chalk dust on the front step, a single word, scrawled neatly, as if the hand that wrote it had known exactly where it would be noticed. Awake. It seemed absurd at first, a prank, a coincidence, but nothing else fit. No footprints, no fingerprints, no signs of entry, only the word, and the storm, unyielding, masking all sound outside. Hours passed, every shadow stretched impossibly long, folding into corners that should have been empty. Every sound, a potential sign, breathing, scratching, shifting, always near, but never fully revealed. Sleep, once a refuge, had become a trap, the micro cliffhanger. But the storm wasn't the thing keeping me awake, because beneath the rain, beneath the howl of the wind, there was something else, something patient, something that understood patterns, knew routines, and waited for them to falter. And when they did, it was already there, watching. Every night followed the same rhythm. Thunder, rain, footsteps, pause, breathing. Each repetition taught them fear in ways they couldn't explain. The house had rules now, invisible but absolute. Break one, and the consequence was immediate. A misplaced blanket, a door left unlocked, a careless glance toward the closet. It was noticed. Always. By night 3, the family began to record. Cameras, audio devices, anything that could catch a trace. What they captured was enough to unsettle even the most rational observer. Shadows that lingered for a fraction of a second longer than possible. Faint shapes in hallways when no one walked them. Soft scraping sounds moving in patterns cameras should not have caught. It became a game of endurance. Watching, listening, waiting for an explanation that would never come. The storm outside seemed almost kind compared to the quiet moments in the house, where the absence of sound made the presence of something else feel heavier, more tangible. And yet, every time they thought they had reached a limit, something new emerged. A sound behind the walls, a note slipped under a door, an object out of place that had not been there moments before. It was as if the house itself were alive, rewriting its own story around them, turning their routines into rituals they didn't understand but were forced to follow. The storm continued, the rain continued, and they remained awake, listening, waiting, feeling the pressure of invisible eyes, and the certainty that something had chosen to stay. By the fourth night, the storm had become almost a companion, its fury a constant backdrop to the unease that had settled over the house. But even the storm could not drown out the subtle disturbances that had begun to escalate. It started with the lights. Flickers at first, brief, almost ignorable. But soon they were deliberate, as if the house itself were breathing in sync with the electricity. A lamp in the living room would wink out just as thunder rolled across the sky. A hallway light would dim when no one had touched the switch, only to flare again the moment someone approached. And the shadows. They moved differently now, detaching from their sources. When lightning struck, illuminating the house in sudden stark flashes, a figure seemed to shift along the walls, always at the periphery of vision, gone when you turned to look directly. A presence, teasing, testing. Then came the voice, soft, fragile, almost intimate, whispering his name, never once repeating, never calling anyone else. At first, they convinced themselves it was a trick of the mind. The house was old, voices carried strangely, but the tone was unmistakable, familiar, patient, deliberate. They would rise from bed, heart pounding, and follow the sound through the dark corridors. Every door checked, every room scanned. Nothing. Empty. Only the storm outside, only the rhythmic pounding of water against the roof. And yet, when they returned to the bedroom, the whisper would return, faint but insistent, as though mocking their efforts. I wasn't a believer in anything paranormal, until that week, they would admit later, voice trembling, eyes distant. Every rational explanation fell apart. Wind, rodents, electrical faults, none accounted for the intimacy of the whispers, the precision of the movements, or the intelligence implied in every action the house seemed to take. Objects began to shift, subtle at first. A book on the table, open to a page they had never read, a coat hanging neatly, then found on the floor the next morning. Pens, keys, toys, all relocated without explanation. And while none of these incidents seemed overtly threatening, the message was clear. Someone, or something, was aware, watching, marking its presence in the smallest, most personal ways. The emotional strain became impossible to hide. Days blurred into restless nights, hours stretching under the weight of fear and uncertainty. Sleep was a memory. Paranoia crept into every action. The simplest decision, a step into the kitchen, a glance out the window, felt monumental. They began to question their own mind, wondering if exhaustion had warped reality itself. And still, there was no full explanation. Only fragments, half glimpses, faint echoes. One night, standing in the hallway, they saw it. A shadow moving against the wall at the exact moment the thunder struck, impossibly fast, slipping from the corner of their vision to another. They turned sharply. Nothing. The hallway was empty, the lights flickered. The storm continued its endless roar outside. The family's recordings, once a tool of reassurance, only deepened the unease. Audio clips captured soft footsteps in rooms no one occupied. Video cameras caught flashes of movement too quick to be human. Every attempt to confront it resulted in confusion. The more they searched, the less they understood. Even the rational moments were tainted by dread. Doors opened only to slam shut moments later. Curtains swayed, though no windows were cracked. Rainwater dripped in patterns that seemed almost intentional. Every pattern, every irregularity became a puzzle with no solution, each answer spiraling back into more questions. And in those endless nights, a quiet realization grew. The house itself had rules, and they had unwittingly become players in its game. Every misstep, every hesitation, every glance could provoke a response. The house was patient, but relentless. The micro cliffhanger came like a whisper through the storm. But that was only the beginning. Because by now the events had begun to escalate beyond subtle movements and whispers. They were being watched not just in the house, but in their own routines, their own thoughts. The feeling of unseen eyes waiting for the exact moment of vulnerability, became suffocating, and the story was far from over. Shadows were no longer content to linger in corners. They pressed closer. The voices no longer whispered from afar. They seemed to echo inside the mind itself. Each night stretched longer than the last. Every creak, every flicker of light, every breath outside the window was amplified, magnified, catalogued by something that had learned patience. And as the storm continued to lash the outside world, inside, the family faced a relentless truth. There was no place to hide, no corner of the house untouched, no moment safe. By the fifth night, the house had become a trap disguised as shelter. Every step felt heavier, as if the walls themselves bore down on he, tightening with each heartbeat. The storm outside had grown relentless, rain lashing against the windows with an almost furious insistence. But it was inside where the unease had begun to take shape. The first undeniable sign came in the kitchen. Footprints, muddy, heavy, fresh. But the yard had not been walked in for days. No one had entered, and yet there they were, crossing the hallway, turning toward the living room, and stopping just short of the bedroom door. They were meticulous, deliberate, impossible to ignore. The family checked and rechecked, expecting some logical explanation. None existed. Windows began opening on their own. Not a creak, not a draft. Full panels sliding inward as though guided by invisible hands. Screens shifted, curtains pulled back, allowing rain to stream inside, soaking furniture and flooring. Every gust of wind seemed purposeful, yet no wind could explain the precision of the movement. Exhaustion had set in long ago, but now doubt crept deeper. Was I imagining it all? Was this exhaustion? Or had something taken root in the house? Something I could not see? Every time the entity, or whatever presence lingered, revealed itself, the storm seemed to rise in tandem. Rain battered the roof, hammered the windows, drowned out every sound except for the faintest echoes inside. It was as if the world itself responded, amplifying fear, sharpening every heartbeat. The air grew heavy, almost viscous, settling in the lungs like smoke, pressing down with a weight that no rational mind could explain. Fingers tingled and froze, despite the blanket pulled tightly around them. Every touch, every movement carried the sensation of resistance, as if reality itself had grown dense, designed to slow them, to trap them further. And then, the unmistakable presence. Breath on the neck. Not a whisper, not a sound, just warmth, rapid and sharp, brushing along the skin in moments when no one was there. He jerked back, spinning toward empty hallways, toward darkened corners, toward the familiar spaces that had become alien. Nothing. The house remained still. The storm roared. And yet the sensation lingered, impossible to shake, lingering like smoke in the room. Objects moved with intention. A chair slid back from the table. A glass tipped slightly on the edge of the counter, water trembling inside. Pens rolled across desks, as though tracing invisible paths. The family began to record every movement, every sound, but cameras only captured fragments. Shadows, blurs, fleeting anomalies that explained nothing but confirmed everything. Sleep was now a foreign concept. Every attempt at rest ended with a jolt. A shadow near the doorway, a floorboard creaking in impossible patterns, a whisper brushing the ear. Days blurred. Food became tasteless, conversations hollow. Rationality fought to survive, but each incident pushed it further away. And yet, there was a strange magnetism. Something held you there, tethered to the house despite the mounting fear. As if leaving was impossible, or worse, as if leaving would make the consequences worse. Each night was a trial, each hour an examination in patience and terror, and the storm outside mirrored the chaos inside. Finally, the breaking moment approached. Standing in the hall, drenched from an open window, fingertips frozen, breath ragged, he realized this was no longer about subtle disturbances. This was a presence asserting itself in the most personal ways imaginable. It was close, patient, deliberate, and watching. And then, the micro cliffhanger. I should have left the house that night, but I didn't. Because the pull of fear is a paradox. The mind tells you to run, to escape, to abandon everything, but something deeper, something darker, roots you in place. And when that hesitation becomes choice, the house waits, knowing you are vulnerable, knowing the night is still young, and knowing the story is far from over. By now, the storm had become a relentless companion, drumming against the walls with a rhythm that seemed to echo the pounding of his heart. Nights blurred into mornings, and every hour felt elongated, heavy, as if the house itself measured time differently. Sleep was a memory, Reality had become fractured. It was during one particularly sleepless night, after hours of pacing in the hallway, that he felt a pull toward the attic. A floorboard groaned under weight that wasn't theirs. Something had been waiting, and it had led them there. The attic was dusty, neglected, a repository of forgotten belongings. Boxes stacked haphazardly, covered in cobwebs, contained remnants of lives once lived in the house. As they sifted through the clutter, their fingers brushed against a small leather-bound journal. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. The handwriting inside was careful, deliberate, and immediately recognizable as the voice of someone who had endured exactly what they were now experiencing. The footsteps return every night when the rain hits. I am not alone. They follow me from room to room. I do not know if anyone will believe me. His breath caught. Each entry described incidents that mirrored their own. Lights flickering, windows opening on their own, shadows that moved against the walls. The diary contained reports of whispers, objects displaced, doors left ajar, all with the same meticulous detail, and every entry carried a growing desperation, a creeping sense of inevitability. As the storm intensified outside, he uncovered more. Police reports, yellowed and brittle, tucked behind a stack of old newspapers, spoke of a tenant who had disappeared during a night of torrential rain. No trace, no evidence, only the storm, the footprints, and an empty house. The dates lined up unnervingly with the journal entries. It was then that a personal weight pressed down even heavier. I had just lost my job when all this happened. I couldn't afford to move even if I wanted to, he admitted in a voice tinged with both fear and frustration. The house, with its relentless disturbances, seemed to mock their vulnerability. With nowhere else to go, every decision felt like a trap. Every hesitation became a chain binding them tighter to the unseen presence. They pored over the journals late into the night, piecing together patterns. The former tenant had documented strange coincidences, like objects moving in patterns that matched the storm, whispers that called names precisely at moments of exhaustion, and a feeling of being watched even when alone. Most chilling of all were the final entries, which ended abruptly. The footsteps have begun outside the bedroom door. I hear them in the attic. They are patient. They know my fears. I cannot. The entry stopped suddenly. On the same date, his own strange footsteps, the faint dragging sounds that had haunted their nights, had first begun. It was an impossible coincidence, or perhaps something far more deliberate. Every instinct screamed to leave, to escape, yet the storm raged, and so did the presence. The attic air was thick, almost suffocating. Dust motes floated in the weak glow of the flashlight, but they seemed to shimmer unnaturally, as though the house itself exhaled, watching every movement. As they backed away from the journals, a floorboard creaked above. A shadow seemed to cross the doorway, but when they looked, nothing was there. The sense of intelligence, of awareness, had grown undeniable. This was not random. This was deliberate, and it had been here long before he had arrived, waiting, planning, observing every human frailty with precision. For the first time he realized the depth of what they faced. This presence had history. It had claimed victims before. It had a pattern, and they were now part of it. Every sound, every flicker of the lights, every gust of wind carrying rain into the house was a reminder. The house was alive in ways they could barely comprehend, and it remembered. And then the micro cliffhanger landed like a weight. The entries stopped suddenly, on the same date my footsteps began. The implication was terrifying. Whatever haunted the house was patient enough to wait decades, yet precise enough to resume its presence the exact moment a new resident entered. The storm outside became deafening, drumming on the roof with a fury that seemed almost sentient. Every shadow lengthened, every breath froze in the air. And he knew, in the pit of their chest, that whatever had been here before was still here now, and it was watching. The storm had grown into something monstrous by the sixth night. Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 fingertips, tapping in uneven rhythm. Wind pressed against the windows, as if begging to be let in. The whole house trembled under the weight of nature's fury, but inside, something far more deliberate was moving. He tried to sleep. For the first time in days, they felt exhaustion so deep it forced their eyes shut. The thunder rolled overhead, the walls shivered, the attic moaned, But sleep didn't protect them. Not anymore. In the early hours of the morning, just when their body had surrendered, he felt a presence standing near the bed. That thick, icy air, unmistakable now, crept along their arms, settling on the tips of their fingers like frostbite. Their breathing slowed. A static-like buzz filled the room. Lightning flashed. For a fraction of a second, something stood over them. A silhouette, tall, lean, shoulders too sharp, head tilted as though examining them. Not moving, not blinking, just watching. Darkness swallowed the room again, before their mind could process the shape fully, before they could convince themselves it wasn't real. When the next flash of lightning came, it was gone. He bolted upright, chest tight. The room was empty, but the air clung to them, thick and cold, as if the presence hadn't left so much as stepped aside. The storm roared louder, and then, that's when I realized I wasn't alone. They slid out of bed, legs shaking, and walked into the hallway. The only light came from the storm outside, brief flickers slicing the darkness each time lightning hit. Halfway down the hallway, there it was, a hand. Long fingers curling slowly around the doorframe, too thin, too long, the joints bending in angles that weren't entirely human. The skin was damp, as if soaked through by the rain. He froze. Their throat tightened, breath caught halfway, the fingers flexed, and pulled back out of sight. Each heartbeat echoed harder than the thunder outside. With trembling steps they approached the doorway. Nothing. No figure. No movement. Only the smell of damp earth lingering in the air. For a moment, there was silence. An unnatural quiet that didn't belong to a storm-drenched night. Then a whisper slid through the dark. Their own voice, perfectly mimicked, calling their name. He staggered back, a hand gripping the wall for balance. Every instinct told them to run, but their body stayed frozen in place. The whisper came again, calmer this time, as if coaxing. It wasn't trying to scare me, he admitted in the documentary interview years later. Their eyes stayed fixed on the floor as they spoke. It was trying to communicate. The lights flickered in response. Once, twice, then went dead. Only the rain remained, crashing against the windows so violently it sounded like fists pounding to get in. Each wave of thunder seemed synced now. Not random, not natural. The storm changed whenever the presence moved. He walked backward down the hallway, pulse pounding in their ears. A cold current of air brushed past their neck, gentle, almost curious, followed by a pressure on the back of their shoulder, like fingers lightly pressing. They spun. No one was there. But the footprints were. Fresh, muddy ones, trailing behind them, even though they hadn't walked through mud. The whisper came again, this time behind their left ear, close enough for the heat of a breath to linger. Listen. It was their own voice again, but distorted, lower, drawn out, as if spoken by lungs that hadn't breathed in years. He stumbled into the living room, hands shaking uncontrollably. Every shadow seemed to shift when lightning cracked through the sky, stretching across the walls with unnatural length. They pressed their back against the wall, trying to steady themselves. And then, the room changed. The air sank lower, thicker, pressing into their chest. The temperature dropped sharply, so cold their fingertips numbed instantly. Their breath fogged in front of them, despite the heavy humidity from the storm. The silhouette appeared again, this time in the reflection of the glass door, standing directly behind them. Too close. He gasped and spun around, but nothing stood there. They looked back toward the glass. Still there. Still behind them. Still watching. The presence stepped closer in their reflection, inch by inch, until its face was almost level with theirs. Its outline sharpened just enough to form the shape of hollow eyes, and a mouth that didn't seem meant for speaking. And then... But what it said next froze every bone in my body. The reflection leaned forward. Its mouth opened, slow and unnatural. And in his voice, broken and strained, it whispered, "Don't leave." He ran to the front door, heart hammering, lungs screaming for air. The storm outside had reached a terrifying crescendo. Rain lashed the walls. Lightning flashed in violent bursts, illuminating the hallway for mere fractions of a second. Every time, it felt as though the house itself took a breath. They gripped the doorknob, twisted it, yanked. Nothing. The latch wouldn't move. Panic clawed at the chest. They tried another door, locked. Tried a window, stubborn, unyielding. Glass that should have shattered under the slightest pressure remained intact, mocking them. The phone slipped from their hand. Battery drained in an instant. Darkness pressed against them. The storm outside roared as if it knew they were trapped, and every flash of lightning revealed something new, something closer. First, a silhouette at the end of the hallway. Then, a shadow moving faster than the human eye should perceive. Then, shapes shifting behind furniture. Always closer than before. Always patient. Always watching. He stumbled backward into the living room. Their vision swam with panic. And then, a sound that froze their blood. A familiar laugh. It was the voice of someone they loved. A sibling, a friend, a parent from memory. Warm, safe, trusting. "Hello," he called, voice breaking. The laugh came again. Close. Too close. A face appeared in the darkness. Familiar. Achingly familiar. The kind of face that pulled at the heart, that carried decades of memory. But the eyes were wrong. Hollow, empty, watching, studying. And the smile, stretched too wide, too deliberate, impossibly cruel. He screamed, backing into the corner. The room felt heavier, like the air itself was watching them, pressing, alive, hungry. Breathing became laborious. Their fingertips froze. Every step forward was resisted, as if the floor itself had thickened. Lightning flashed again. The entity was closer, too close to ignore. Every time the flash hit, the figure shifted, a fraction of an inch, until it occupied the space they had just been standing. He tried another window, still locked. Tried the back door, locked. Tried to call for help, but the phone refused to charge, refused to connect. Even in desperation, there was no escape. And then, it began to imitate voices. Voices of those they loved most. Softly at first, pleading, comforting. "It's okay." Then demanding, "Come here." Then taunting, "Why are you running?" He pressed themselves against the wall, trembling. The air grew denser. Every breath was a battle. Every step was a struggle. Even the storm seemed to conspire with the presence, its fury magnifying each heartbeat, each shiver of fear. Lightning struck closer now. Each flash revealed new horrors. Fingers pressing against walls where no one could be. Faces in mirrors that weren't reflections. Shadows kneeling, crouching, inching forward. The house was no longer a building. It was a trap. Every room an extension of the entity's will. Every door a challenge, every shadow a threat. The entity spoke in his voice now, a perfect imitation of panic, of desperation, of thoughts he hadn't spoken aloud. It knew their fears. It knew their weaknesses. It had learned patience over decades, and now it had them cornered. And then, the micro cliffhanger landed like a blade. And then, it stepped into the light. The lightning flashed, and for the first time the presence was fully visible. Its figure stretched taller than human, shoulders angular, fingers impossibly long. Its face, a perfect mask of the people he loved, twisted in impossible ways. Its eyes burned with intelligence, malice, and something far colder. Calculation. The storm roared louder, thunder shaking the walls. Rain drummed on the roof like frantic fists, and in that flash of light, he knew there was no turning back. The entity was here. The house had claimed them. Every instinct screamed to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The storm blocked escape. The doors refused. The windows held firm. And the figure was stepping closer. The figure stepped fully into the light, illuminated by the blinding flash of lightning. The storm outside reached its crescendo, thunder rattling the walls like the house itself was crying out. Rain lashed against the windows, heavy and relentless, yet the world outside was almost secondary now. Inside, the presence held every ounce of his attention. Its face was familiar, eerily familiar. Features of those they loved, twisted, elongated, impossible. But the voice was exactly theirs. Every whispered fear, every gasp of terror, every doubt that had crept into their mind over these nights. It spoke in their own tone, their own cadence, their own unmistakable sound. He stumbled backward, heart hammering so hard it felt like it would burst. What are you?" they choked. The figure mirrored them perfectly, tilting its head as if curious. Its fingers flexed, long and deliberate, brushing air where he had just stood. Each movement was precise, almost rehearsed. And then the truth hit, sliding into their mind like ice through veins. The voice had always been theirs. Every whisper, every call of their name, every taunting echo had been the sound of a future self, one that had already crossed into whatever this presence had become. A self shaped by fear, by despair, by the trauma of nights just like these, stretched into eternity. They sank to the floor shaking. Memories, fragmented and faint, clawed at the edges of consciousness. A stormy night from childhood, a hidden attic, a shadow lurking in corners. They had once laughed it off, pretended it was a dream, but now they realized those moments had never left them. The entity stepped closer, its face warping slightly, always in sync with his own expressions, mimicking every flicker of doubt, every blink, every subtle twitch of muscle. Every flash of lightning confirmed it further. This was no external force. This was them. Or at least, the version of themselves they would become if they surrendered entirely to fear. And then the flash of understanding came, unbearable in its clarity. The storm, the shadows, the whispers were warnings. It had been calling their attention to themselves, to their own unresolved fears, their own traumas, their own spiraling thoughts that had rooted in the house like seeds. The house had amplified it, yes, but it had not created it. They had brought it. They had invited it in through years of buried memory, through every choice, every regret, every ignored warning. The reflection of their future self leaned closer. Its mouth moved, slower this time, deliberate, shaping words he could almost not hear over the storm. Don't become me. His chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to run, to fight, to leave the house. But there was nowhere to go. Every door, every window, every path was blocked. Not by locks, not by walls, but by inevitability. The storm's fury mirrored the entity's intent. Relentless, omnipresent, unavoidable. And yet, there was purpose here. The entity didn't attack, didn't scream, didn't reach out to harm. It only mimicked, only mirrored, only showed a possibility. The worst version of he, born of fear left unchecked, of trauma unresolved, of memories unexamined. Lightning cracked one final time, blinding, and for a single heartbeat, he saw everything. The shadows that had moved, the whispers, the footprints, the mirrored voices, all pointing toward one truth. They were looking at themselves. A self that could exist if they let fear define them. A self that could be trapped, tormented, and lost forever in this storm and this house. Then the figure receded slightly, melting back into the dark corners of the house. The storm remained, yes, but a strange stillness followed. The house seemed quieter, as if it had delivered its message and now waited. The whispers faded, the shadows slackened. The air felt lighter, though still heavy with the memory of what had just been revealed. He sank to the floor, trembling, sobbing, finally understanding. It hadn't been trying to kill them. It hadn't been trying to terrorize them without purpose. It had been trying to show them a mirror of their own potential despair. And as the lightning faded, leaving only the muted drumming of rain, they whispered to themselves, voice shaking, I see it now. I see me. The storm eventually eased. Rain softened to a dull patter against the roof. Lightning became rare, distant, and the roar of thunder faded into the night. He emerged from the house, staggering, drenched, body trembling from exhaustion, mind frayed to its edges. They were alive. Somehow. Miraculously, they were alive. The house stood behind them, silent now. Shadows stretched long under the pale glow of moonlight. Yet the relief was thin, fragile, fleeting. Every instinct warned that the presence had not left, could not leave. I walked away, he confided years later, voice barely above a whisper. I thought leaving meant I was safe, but every time it rains, I still hear it. The footsteps, the whispers, the voice, mine, yet not mine, always just behind me, always waiting. They pressed a hand to their chest. The memory of cold fingertips, long shadows, and that reflection of themselves lingered, unshakable. Sleep remained a fragile thing, punctuated by the echo of footsteps they could not identify as real or imagined. People say the mind plays tricks during storms. That imagination warps sound, shadow, fear. But what happened to me? wasn't in my mind. And sometimes, when the rain drums against the windows, when the lightning slices the sky and the wind whistles through the trees, he knows the truth. The house, the presence, the future self they glimpsed, it never really lets go. It waits, patient, observant, and the rain reminds them that the story is far from over. The rain had finally slowed to a drizzle, but the memory of it remained alive in his chest. The house loomed behind them, silent, empty, or so it seemed. Every instinct screamed that the storm had not ended the story. It had only paused it, a heartbeat in a longer, unrelenting rhythm. They paused, breathing in the damp night air, chest tight with exhaustion, and a lingering sense of being watched. Fingers still cold from the memory of frozen touches, heart still pounding from the shadows that had lingered. Even now, years later, the storms bring it back. The voice, the footsteps, the reflection that wasn't quite them. "If it rains tonight, don't sleep near the window," they whispered, almost to themselves, almost a warning, almost a plea. Every raindrop against the roof, every distant rumble of thunder carries the echo of what was once inside that house. And sometimes, in the stillness, they hear it again. The faintest whisper calling their name, familiar, intimate, terrifying. "I still hear footsteps when the storms come," they admit, voice barely audible over the wind. "And I know I'm not alone, even when I'm outside, even when the house is behind me." Then, after a long pause, a quieter, almost conspiratorial tone, "Tell me, have you ever heard someone calling you during a storm?" Another pause, heavier this time, as if waiting for the listener to answer. "Should I share the recordings I found? The ones that prove it, that show it wasn't just in my mind?" And finally, a soft, deliberate invitation. "Comment, if you're listening to this in the dark, but be careful, the storm might be listening too." The night stretches on. Rain taps lightly against the window, and somewhere, just beyond the edge of hearing, a familiar whisper waits, patient and relentless. The screen fades to black, the echo lingers, and the story doesn't end.